story games slowly fading out in favor of multiplayer games. It feels like with each new game coming out, it feels like we're switching more from story to a multiplayer. There's always a multiplayer in a game, and they feel like they mainly focus on the multiplayer. They don't really add any DLCs to the story or anything, they just kind of focus on the multiplayer. There's still good story games coming out, don't get me wrong. Still are, still will be. But it feels like it's a lot more focused on the multiplayer, and every game nowadays has a multiplayer, and it feels like they're really focusing on the multiplayer a lot. There's a bit more work going into story than a multiplayer game, so I fully understand why it takes longer. But it also kind of feels like either the game has a good multiplayer or has a good story. It kind of feels like the majority of the game nowadays either have one of those. I feel like one game that could, if they tried, it could have both. It could have had both. Would be Red Dead Redemption. The story is insanely good. The game is insanely good. But the multiplayer Red Dead Online, it's fun, but it's not the best. And they just straight up left like a child. Just left it. A lot of the single player story games coming out nowadays don't really feel good. If you ask me, they just don't feel like fully finished. A lot of them. They feel like they had a project. They had a deadline. They had a project. They needed to finish that project, so they just kind of threw on a couple assets, tried to call it a day, and then they send it out, and it did not work. Story games takes time, but that's one of the reasons why there's not a lot of them coming out. It takes time, especially to get a good one. And a multiplayer is a lot easier, especially when you're a AAA company. You already know what to do, you already got all the tools, you already got the servers, all that sort of shit. So it's a lot easier. It also kind of feels like some of the studios, they're not really trying anything new, they're not really doing anything new, they just, well, we gotta make a new game. Let's just make a new game in one of our series. And sometimes, I'm gonna be honest, the series, they kinda need to die. Like, they're sometimes pushing it too far. But they know that people know this series and people are gonna buy the game, next installment in this series and all that sort of stuff. Which is probably why they don't really make new games, because like, well, let's just make a fourth game to this franchise right here. People already know it and people are gonna buy it. So let's just do that. It's a lot easier and we're gonna make a lot of money from it. Instead of trying to come up with a new idea and a fresh idea. And of course it takes more money to come up with a whole new concept than it does to just come up with a new story plot or whatever for an already existing franchise where you already have a backstory, you already have some characters potentially. And it feels like a lot of studios has kind of gotten stuck in this routine and just making a new installment in this game. And when almost all the companies do it, it feels like there's not really anything new or exciting. And sometimes, at least if you ask me, the more games that comes out of a certain franchise, usually the less like love goes into each game. It feels just like, well, let's just make a new game, throw these assets in, go out, which is sad. But do I think that multiplayer is taking over? And do I think story games is kind of dying? No. To boil everything down as in this video, no, I do not believe it is. I do believe multiplayer is more popular now than single player and story. I do believe that it's way more popular now. It's probably the most popular that it's ever been. And will probably continue to get a bit more popular, but story games will never die out. A lot of people want stories, a lot of people want different things. I also think one thing we're going to see is stories mixed into online. For example, Red Dead is kind of a story.